Hello, friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm your hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie. Today, helping me as co-hostess is Ashley McGuire. Welcome, Ashley.
Hey, Gracie.
So good to have you on. And we have a wonderful guest, a personal friend of mine, whose acquaintance I'm deepening in a beautiful way because she gave a speech at the fall conference of the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture in 2019 that I wasn't at, but I received the text of it, and we just had to have her on because it was absolutely wonderful, and I thought that our listeners would really like it. And her name is Betsy Fentress. She is a writer at large and an author of 2 cookbooks, I believe, and you'll correct me, Betsy, if I'm wrong. But we welcome you to the show. Her name is Betsy Fentress. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Actually, 3 cookbooks.
Oh, okay. Well, give us the names of your cookbooks.
The Bryant Family Vineyard Cookbook, and a book devoted to pecans, and a book devoted to almonds. Their history, recipes, culture on almonds and on pecans.
Oh, wonderful. Betsy, I have to confess, I'm no cook, and...
That's okay. We're going to talk about that today.
I'm no cook, but we are going to talk about friendship and hospitality around the table. And you gave a beautiful talk, as I mentioned, called the Supper Discourses, the table as the nexus of friendship. And so tell us your thoughts that I know that you've been gestating them for a long time as a cook, as a hostess of many wonderful dinners and occasions for fellowship around the table. And tell us your thoughts about the Supper Discourses.
Well, I'm the 10th of 11 children. And so the table was really the center of my family life growing up. And even though I was 6 when my first oldest sister went to college, it was really the way I got to be close to each of those siblings who were much older than I was, because they inevitably came home for Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving. And my job was always to set the table as a kid, which I still love to do. And when my mother passed away, and we all got together, I realized that I really wanted, that didn't necessarily have a tremendous monetary value, not that, there was one of things like that, but I really wanted the table because it represented to me what family life is all about.
But connect that for us, Betsy, as you do in your talk to the supper, the Last Supper, the Supper Discourses.
Well, I had a study Bible, and the phrase Supper Discourses really jumped out at me. I had never heard it before. And so I started reading about that. And for as many times as I've heard the Gospel of John over the years, I didn't really connect that chapters 14 through 17 are just really the heart of the message that Christ wants to leave with the apostles. I mean, not only is it the Last Supper where he institutes the Eucharist, but he just talks to the apostles as friends. And he says, I call you friends. I know. And that just really, really jumped out at me. And I thought, this is what I like to do. And when my mother died, I wanted to thank a lot of women who had been really great to me in that very short period of time between when she got sick and when she died of lung cancer. And so the only thing I could really think of to do was have a dinner party. And it was just really, really magical to gather all these people who had helped me around my table. And so since that time, I have done something somewhat similar when I'm at the age where my friends' parents, are dying. And right after they die, I call and say, I want to have you over. And a lot of times people stay away from people who have experienced death. They think, well, they need time to heal. They need time to be alone. And there are people like that. But what I have found is that people love it. And I usually gather some other people that they know. And what I did recently was I had everybody go around the table and tell a funny story about their mother. So it sort of allows the person who's grieving to not shove that aside, but to really engage, the memory of their parent in a fun and respectful way, but that sort of breaks the ice.
Betsy, I resonated, or your story about the table resonated with me in a not sentimental of a way, my own sort of table story, but just the kind of irreplaceable nature of a dining room table in a family home. I recently, a couple years ago, bought our first house with my family, and we were moving from an apartment, so we had very little furniture. And the house that we bought had this beautiful pine table that I could tell was handmade. And I became obsessed with wanting to buy the table because it was as if the table was made for the room. And interestingly, the home, the prior owners of the home, he was a chef. And so it was almost like the table had an energy, like so many wonderful meals were served around that table. And as a mom of 5 kids, I just knew that was like the most important thing that I had to lock in, was to have this table, because it was going to be the place where, so many of our memories were served. And we just did a renovation, and I insisted that they do the renovation around the table because it's just such a central part of a home and a family. In your speech at Notre Dame, you tell a story that really embodies what I took away as the thesis of your piece about the way that the meal brings us, from the low into the divine. But you tell a fun story. Can you recount it for our listeners about when one of your children, I think, came home from college with some friends, and how a simple meal converted the energy of everything?
Sure. Our oldest daughter was on fall break, didn't really know a lot of people, but had befriended 2 musicians, and they had nowhere to go. And so it's about 6 hours from here. And so she came home, had a ride, but they asked her if they could come on the Greyhound Red Eye. So they showed up at like 11 o'clock in the morning, and they hadn't really had any sleep. They absolutely hadn't had any food. So I ran to the store when I found this out and made a big grazing board for lunch. And so then we had to repeat the same thing at dinner. And so in the course of the conversation, we were, of course, talking about music. And I was talking about how when I grew up, there were just, a couple of radio stations. So everybody knew the same songs, and life is different now. And so somehow National Public Radio came up, and the Prairie Home Companion. And so Ben, who is a violinist, said, "Oh, yeah, he's a nice guy." And I said, "Who's a nice guy?" And he said, "Well, Garrison Keillor." And I said, "Well, how do you know him?" And he said, "Well, actually, I was on the show." And I said, "Why were you on the show?" And he said, "Well, I'm the Wisconsin state fiddle champion." So
wow.
I pulled my husband into the kitchen, and I said, "You need to go down to the Terry's house, and you need to borrow a violin." And he looked at me like I was crazy. And there was a guy down the street who used to repair very high-end cellos and violins, and people would come to the symphony here, drop things off. And so I called, and he said yes, he would lend one. My husband went down, and so when Sam, my husband, walked back in to the dining room, I said, "Ben, you will play for your supper." And the whole evening ended in our living room, and his buddy, Mike, we had a guitar. He played guitar, and we just had this impromptu, delightful concert where, and they're both professional musicians now, but, that wouldn't have happened if we all hadn't been sitting around eating and talking.
So you're talking about something that's a very beautiful virtue, which is the virtue of hospitality. Right, Betsy? Tell us how you feel about that virtue. What does hospitality do, especially when it's centered around the table and eating together? What does that all mean?
Well, in the talk that you referred to, it sort of came together because I was just wanting to explore sort of the philosophical underpinnings of friendship. And of course, Aristotle is sort of the premier on that and writer. And he talks about 3 levels of friendship: utility, pleasure, and virtue. And that really resonated with the different types of meals that you can have with people. And for him, the highest level of friendship is the virtuous one, which means that you will the good of another. And so I started thinking about that and how feeding somebody at your table and opening up your home, and, it can happen in a restaurant, absolutely, is a way to really love someone, to nourish their body initially. And Mother Teresa used to talk a lot about that, is before you can really talk to anybody about God, or first you have to feed them. You have to meet their basic needs. And even though probably the people listening here don't have those basic needs not met, there's a lot of lonely people out there who it's around a table that you can sometimes make them feel loved.
Betsy, you're alluding to what was going to be my next question, which is, we live in this sort of weird paradox where our culture is food obsessed. I mean, just everything is about food. I feel like whenever I read a travel magazine, it's just about food, meal to meal to meal to meal. And, to a degree where I feel like it's become gluttonous. And yet we also have this crisis of loneliness. Where did things go astray such that food has become so seemingly disconnected from the serving the higher purpose of connecting people?
It's a really great question, and I've thought about it a lot, because in the course of my first cookbook, which was for a very high-end winery, I got to eat in some of the best restaurants in the United States, and I really loved it. But part of the problem was that at the end of the day, sometimes all the discussion revolved around the dishes, and that is not really, and my co-author was not like that at all. She had all the same vision that I did about food. And as a matter of fact, the purpose of that cookbook was to help the Bowery Mission in New York City. So I think that people photographing their meals has a lot to do with it. And I really kind of recoil from that. I don't do it myself. But it's a great question. I don't think I have a single answer to it, but I just think, food has become a real consumer culture kind of thing to do. I saw an article in the Financial Times of London a couple of days ago, and it's on scruffy hospitality. And it was coined by an Anglican minister, and it was about encouraging people to not be obsessed with perfection, because then you'll never have people over. And I really think that that's the hospitality that I want to encourage. Your house might not be perfect. You may have to order in food even sometimes, but we have a loneliness epidemic, and I think delivering food to your door maybe during the pandemic was a good idea, but I don't really think it's a very good idea as a long-term practice.
I so sympathize with you. I have a friend, she and her husband give the most amazing dinners. They're both extremely delicate cooks and very careful with the details. And it's like going to a restaurant, but it takes them like 6 months to get that going and to plan it. And they put so much effort into it, and it's so consuming. And I'm always telling them, invite us over and we'll order pizza, because what we want to do is be with you and have that moment that you described so beautifully in your speech, where you've been invited, right? You're receiving hospitality. You feel loved. Your stomach is full. You've had the pizza. It was neither here nor there. It's just it was delicious because it's Papa John's or whatever you like. And then you have that magical moment where you are amongst friends, and I think that must be what heaven is like. And you allude to this in your piece, that moment where everything feels joyful, and you know that you're loved and that you're loving the people across the table from you, and that what you say matters, and they're listening with the ears of their hearts, right? And you're listening to them that same way. And isn't that heaven? That must be what heaven is like. And I think that for in the supper discourses, it was that time after dinner, right? When Jesus had fed his disciples, his apostles, and he then spoke to them, and the ears of their hearts were opened.
Yes, it's a really, really good point. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. There's a lot of people that are nervous to entertain other people because they might not have the right place settings, or they don't think that they're very good cooks. And I never care. I don't ever judge what somebody serves me. I love getting out of my house. I love being somewhere new. And I think that, but listening is a really important part of the conversation. And I do try as a hostess, if I see the conversation going south, or person is dominating, maybe not necessarily, but I do intervene, and I bring the table back to an all-table discussion. I ask questions, or I do kind of what you said, or we're doing right now. Tell me about this thing, or you told me the story the other day. Can you tell it again in front of these people? And people love to be asked about themselves and feel heard and listened to. And I think that's as much what the table is about as anything else.
Following up on that, what would you say to a lot of our listeners are women, and, I think women have a special gift for hospitality. And, I feel like 9 times out of 10, if there's going to be a gathering in a home, it's initiated by women. And we typically, I know there's exceptions to the norm. In fact, in my husband's family, a lot of the families, the men are the ones that cook. But, for listeners who are maybe wanting to do more hosting, but feel a little bit intimidated, especially, again, going back to this idea that our culture is kind of gone a little overboard on food, and everything's just, I don't know, sort of lopsided in the direction of overcomplications with food. What would be some kind of basic tips you would give to people who are wanting to do more hosting, for what you have found has contributed to an overall successful get-together?
Mm-hmm. I would say cook what you love, not what you think other people want, and tell them ahead of time if they have any kind of, issues with wheat or, allergies, and don't apologize. I think that's really important. Just don't explain, just have them over and say, this is what I'm having. And, I don't make appetizers very often. I just don't. I have cheese and crackers and nuts from Trader Joe's. And just make it easy on yourself. I've started serving gelato because sometimes I just don't feel like cooking dessert. I don't eat as much dessert because my kids have all flown the coop. And I would just say, dial it down and think. I gave a version of this talk to a group of seminarians because I really think that hospitality is the way to bring a lot of people back into the church. And so we talked about, there's a book called The Art of Gathering, then I pulled some excerpts from it. And it's like, think about what the purpose of your gathering is. Is it to connect to women who maybe have a special needs child that don't know each other? Is it to connect to men who are both like art? Is it to connect to couples that actually, are from the Midwest and you live on the East Coast? Just maybe have a little teeny tiny, telos to your gathering, and then think about that through the evening. Like, well, I didn't get hurt. I talked to him yet. Let's sit them next to each other, or let's go into the living room and have an after dinner drink, or chocolate or whatever, and make sure that some of the goals that you had, you could kind of sneak in there before the evening ends.
I love that. And I was going to ask you as a follow-up, you have this where you say a table laid for dinner sets the stage for this, a foretaste of eternity. And I love the idea that hospitality is a way to bring people back into the church. Can you connect or explain a little bit more this connection that you draw throughout your speech about the connection between earth and the heavenly meal and how the meal on earth points us to the eternal?
Well, there's a phrase, the heavenly banquet that we all talk about, sharing one day. And I think it's really just that Eucharist means Thanksgiving, and that the first purpose of being around the table with friends is to be thankful for them, and that the Mass is really the perfect expression of that. I also just wanted to say a little bit about putting people together that might not ever get together on their own. And my brother-in-law owned a very famous restaurant in San Francisco and had a lot of politicians that went to it. And so he knew like every mayor. And there were some mayors that really, they were bitter enemies. So one time he had them over, multiple mayors over. And my sister said that they got along famously, and in print and in public, they would just never have gotten together. And they turned to him at the end and they said, "You were the only person who could have pulled this off." And I think that we live in a world of media that we really have a lot of animus toward people on paper. And when you meet someone in the flesh and you share something with them, I think that can fall away. And that movie, Babette's Feast, that's what that meal is about. They're bickering terribly and gossiping about each other before the meal begins. And at the end of the meal, they're just forgiving each other. And I think that's a really important part of hospitality.
I'm glad you brought up Babette's Feast, because you go into it in detail in your speech. That's one of my favorite books and movies. And it's a kind of thing that you watch or you read, and then you have to reflect on it and maybe do it again, right? Because it's about a perfect feast and the transformative aspects of it. Tell us, you mentioned in your speech that the transformative power of food and how that's different from the Eucharist, but also somewhat the same. Can you explain that?
Well, like I said, on that, we're trying to nourish our bodies in a dinner party, like literally. And so in that way, it is different than the Eucharist. The Eucharist, you're not going to, although there have been some saints who seem to survive solely on the Eucharist, which is wonderful and miraculous. But, we're talking about nourishing people with food that, manna, everlasting life-giving food. And I just don't really know how you explain that to somebody who doesn't believe in the real presence. But if you do, and you think about your table and you light the candles and you set it, and if you go to Mass and you watch what happens, at the consecration and before the consecration, and how it's all laid out perfectly, and it's done the same way every time. And I think ritual is just should be an important part of our lives.
Betsy, we're almost out of time, but I have a lightning round question for you.
Sure.
What is your favorite restaurant that you've eaten at? And I'm sure you've eaten at some of the best.
Probably Gramercy Tavern in New York.
One of my favorite meals was there too.
Well, I'm feeling very envious. I have never been. I have to get myself over there.
Danny Meyer, the restaurateur, is from St. Louis, and so I have sort of an affection for his restaurants in New York. But I just think that he wrote a book called Setting the Table, and it's a book about training all of the people who work for him to understand what hospitality means.
Betsy, I'm so inspired. I don't know that I'm going to learn to cook because I'm older now, and that's probably, that ship has sailed. But I do feel very strongly that in our life, the only thing we really ought to be worried about all day long is making it to heaven and bringing as many people as we can there with us, right? And it seems to me the way that you explain the hospitality of the table, that time, that magical time after stomachs are full and friendship flows and mercy and forgiveness gathers amongst the people who got together and were received into someone's home. That's just so inspiring as a source of real apostolate, right? Like real reception of other people's souls and saying, well, we're all in this together and let's get there together. Like, why? We're not on this road alone, right?
I'll tell you one other quick story. I have a very good priest friend who had a bunch of kids who came to his parish on Sunday nights for a catechism. They didn't go to his school. So he fired up the grill and he started making hot dogs on Sunday nights and giving them a hot dog as they left and started talking to the families. And the next fall, he had 40 new kids in his school.
Oh, that reminds me of the college. All my children who've gone to college, the first thing they do is they start going to those spaghetti dinners they have at the Newman Centers because they're desperate for good food.
But, that's hospitality, on the fly. But it was, I'm going to feed you and I'm going to tell you why, we really want you here. And we want you to be part of not only our parish community, but our school community. And they felt invited and loved. Mm-hmm. They accepted the invitation. And that's what I think hospitality is.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy. I think we're all taking a lot away from this. Food as love, hospitality as grace, and always the friendship that brings us together around the table. So thank you, Betsy.
Thank you for having me, and I hope the three of us can share a meal around the table soon.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie, and we're delighted to have with us a focus missionary, Anthony Cirillo. He's at the University of Cincinnati, working with some wonderful Catholic students there. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thanks for having me, Doctor.
Maybe a lot of our listeners know what focus is, but maybe some don't. So can you explain to us what focus is?
Yeah, absolutely. So focus stands for the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and I'm a full-time Catholic missionary to college students, and I serve on one campus at the University of Cincinnati, and we actually serve over 160 campuses around the U.S. and a few in Europe. So,
wow, 160.
Yeah, a little bit more than that.
Now, you say you're a mission. Do you wear a robe or do you look like everyone else?
Yeah, I just wear rags everywhere. No, I look very much like everybody else. I'm actually married. I have 3 children. I'm 28 years old. I'm just a lay person, fully on mission to these students. I'm a little bit older for our missionaries at this point because I've been doing this for 7 years, but it's been a huge blessing and been an amazing way that the Lord's used me and worked in my life as well.
So this is a tremendous commitment for a young married man with 3 children.
It sure is, yeah. But we eased our way in. I started off not married and got married my time as a missionary, and we've started our family on mission. And it's not what I would have sketched out, but boy, the Lord has provided, and He's really used our vocation as well and leveraged that in the mission, on campus. So better than I could have ever imagined.
Wow, your life, the way that you're living it must be such a testament to the students that you evangelize.
I certainly hope so. My wife hopes so as well. It's a joy, to be able to bring in college students into our home. They get to see me, the bread and butter things that we do are we mentor students, we lead Bible studies, we meet students where they're out on campus. When I have Bible study, it's so often over at my home, in my living room. Usually, one of them for the past couple of years is right after I put my kids to bed. I kind of roll out of putting my kids to bed and come downstairs, and usually there's a group of guys there on a Thursday night ready to read the Bible and pray together.
What kind of hunger do you feel on campus amongst young people for God?
I think there's a hunger for something true, for something that matters. I think everyone has that hunger for God in some way, but we try to fill it in many other ways, especially, the college campus. There's just many different stereotypes, things that we try to fill that God-sized hole with. We're hungry for that living water that Jesus talks about in John chapter 4, but a lot of the students, might be filling it with something else, whether that's, alcohol, drugs, sex, or even just like an addiction to success. But I think it is all pointing to wanting something more, wanting something that's going to persist forever, that's going to matter. Desire for intimate relationships. And you see how the desire for intimacy can get skewed, draw people to things that are not good or kind of twisted.
What about a desire for things that are wholesome and pure in a world that doesn't reflect that back to us?
I think that is a desire deep down. What I've found on campus with many people, we'll talk about, say, relationships, because when you use those words, I think about like dating relationships, for instance. And I think there is the desire for young people to have this wholesome, pure, true love. In pursuit of that, they might be settling for less, whether that's, hookup culture, or that's settling for, that boyfriend or girlfriend that they just think, oh yeah, maybe they'll just change, or I can change them. And they make all these different concessions. But I think deep down there is a desire for something good, true, beautiful, which, comes from our Creator, from God. And I think, for my vocation, serving as a married missionary, not that we are by no means a perfect family, no means, but to show the students a little bit of our vocation, whether it's inviting them over for dinner, or later tonight, I have people over to pray the rosary. We just do like a rosary and kind of like a meditation on Tuesday nights now. They get to, come into our messy house, which we try to clean up. But, if 3 small children, maybe you don't get everything picked up. But we invite them into that. And, my wife will pray the rosary with us. And so they can kind of see, wow, these are, some 28-year-olds who have kids and are praying the rosary with college students and sharing, life with college students. So we can kind of show them, I think, sometimes like it is possible to, be in a faithful marriage with children that can be stressful. It can be hard, but it's really, really beautiful. So
that's a great testament, a great witness that you give to young people, to invite them into your home and see a young marriage and a young united marriage, a marriage united around God. And when so many young people, as we know, come from broken homes, they've never had that model to aspire to.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've just seen it, and even just other missionaries. I had a teammate a couple of years ago, and she became my teammate right after we got married. And I remember she asked my wife at a dinner early in the year. We'd been married only a few months. She's like, "How are you guys married?" And I remember hearing this, and I was like, "Ouch!" Like, I know I married up, I know, but like, ooh, that really stung. And what actually the backstory to that was she had come from a tough home environment, where there was the marriage ended. There was a divorce. And so she wasn't asking, how did this guy, get married to this gorgeous, amazing woman, so much as it was, how are you actually living this vocation? I don't think this is possible. And I do remember, thanks be to God, 2 years later, and this is a teammate who, we spent a lot of time with together. She was there when our oldest was born, just in the hospital, back in those pre-COVID days where you could have a bunch of people visit you in the hospital. But I remember my teammate, at the end of her time, and we were on a team together for 2 years, she remarked that, now she saw that vocation as possible. And the vocation of marriage is possible and attractive. And now I think she hasn't got married yet, but she's engaged. And it's just like, wow, like we got to play a little bit of a role there, that the Lord used us. We didn't sketch it out like, oh, we're going to make sure we invest in her and she'll have this, conversion or something necessarily, but we're just going to love her and, invite her into our home life. And then the Lord did the heavy lifting. So it was awesome.
I remember being a college student, and I remember being very lonely sometimes. And my own children who've gone to college or are in college now talk about their loneliness. How big a factor do you think loneliness is in college students' lives?
I think it's huge. I mean, especially even before COVID, even before the social isolation, I think there's like something in the air that they're breathing that's like, if I don't live a certain way, if I'm not going out with everybody, if I'm in my room alone on a Friday night, that is the worst thing ever. And I think there's can be this illusion that in order to have friends in college, you have to partake in certain activities, we'll say, like whether it's drugs, alcohol, going out, And I think like a joy in part of my job is showing the student like, hey, is connecting people. I love connecting people. It's showing that student who says, man, I don't got anything to do Friday night. Like, I guess I have no other choice but to either sit in my room and twiddle my thumbs or go hit the bars with my fake ID. And saying, actually, you know what? We actually are trying to create something different over here that's attractive and that doesn't just have drug, sex, and alcohol. That's been another just joy where it's like you can live fully alive without these substances. And yeah, for like students who are of age, let's talk about, how we can have a drink and not get drunk, and what does sobriety actually mean, or what does chastity actually mean? Like we can really lean into those conversations. But yeah, totally. The college campus, it can be this place where, everybody I'm surrounded by people, but I feel so alone. And there can be many different reasons to that.
Many college campuses have Catholic student centers, Newman centers.
Yep.
Do you work with them, or is this a completely separate thing, or do you inhabit separate areas of the sort of that campus Catholic life?
The way that we work with Focus is we always want to partner with that campus ministry on the ground. We don't want to create a separate thing. We want to add and like supplement what they have going on and just make it better. We want to like broaden their reach, hopefully. We aren't going to create events that are like going to rival the Newman Center's events, but we also want to bring people to the Newman Center. We want to bring them to Mass. And maybe we also want to like make some of those events better sometimes. Maybe there's like a suggestion a missionary can make. Say, hey, like if we thought about doing this, maybe this could help us reach more people on campus. So we very much want to come in and respect and honor what's been going on at the Newman Center, and then say, how can we help? How can we add here? Never want to become like a competitor.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Anthony Cirillo. He's a Focus missionary at the University of Cincinnati. Anthony, recently over 175 students from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati attended Seek. I know that Father Mike Schmidt, who was a guest with us recently, gave an amazing message.
Yeah, thanks be to God. Like you said, we actually have 3 campuses with Focus in the Archdiocese here, and through some planning and some creative planning and collaboration with the Archdiocese, we were able to kind of do a remote Seek 21, where Seek 21 this year was around, anyone could go around the globe because it was virtual, but we said we want to create that conference experience to as best we can in the safest way we can. We want to create that in Cincinnati for our students, and by the grace of God, we had, it's like 175 students from Cincinnati coming together for Mass to watch different keynotes, to stream them. For us, our campus at the University of Cincinnati, we actually had an opening night at a local brewery, like a Catholic-owned brewery down the street. We just partnered with them. We're like, can we stream this and then have all our people come here? They're named Humble Monk Brewery. So if you're in Cincinnati, check out Humble Monk. Really, really good. So we made the best of it, and it was a lot to pull together, but it was extremely enjoyable. And students who would not have maybe traveled with us to St. Louis to go to like a normal Seek in the past years, they were like, well, I can stay in Cincinnati, I can pay to go to this, and then I'm going to go to this brewery one night for the keynotes. We're watching Sister Miriam and Bishop Barron. They're being streamed up on the wall of this brewery, and we're hanging out having pizza, and people are of age are having beers.
How much fun.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Like we're just grateful that we had so much support from our local supporters and from the bishop and from our chaplains to pull something off that was really special. One of the other highlights of it is we had an adoration night. So usually at these Seek conferences, they're usually every year, and they're usually in, one location, and then everyone from around the country gathers together, and you'll have these masses with 10,000 college students or 20,000 college students at Mass together in one spot. And then we'll also have these adoration nights where it's, adoration and then confession being offered. And usually, you're in a huge, conference center, and thousands of people are in adoration together in front of our Lord. We couldn't quite do that, but we actually had it downtown here at the cathedral. We were able to rally, local priests and say, hey, we got, hopefully 200 students coming in. We'd love for everyone to be able to go to confession that night. So with our chaplains, we rallied, like 15 priests, and then, all these students could go to confession. And some of them went for the first time. Some of them went to adoration for the first time. And
nice.
What a gift, these sacraments are in our faith. And it's, I get to introduce students to these sacraments. I get to help them, find the Lord in these ways. It's a joy.
People who at that age go to college, they're like sponges. They're at the age where you are ready to change and grow and become. How wonderful that they have people like you helping them to grow and change and become more like Christ.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that's all that we want.
These days of cancel culture and ideological division and political division, have you felt that the things got a little dicey on the ground at the University of Cincinnati, or do you always feel that you're operating in a welcoming space?
That's a great question. I think with COVID, some of those places where we would face outright like opposition at a public university, just like students aren't really there right now. So whether that's like here we have online classes, and a lot of people aren't just walking around outside, even though it's a gorgeous day. It's just not as much like foot traffic on campus. And that would be where we sometimes would run into those, more like aggressive, like atheists or things like that. I'd say here, students overall are really open to talking, really open to conversation. A lot of people were raised Catholic, so I think that's a great opportunity. We talk about like the new evangelization. It's really that re-evangelization of areas that had been evangelized when John Paul talks about that. So yeah, I'd say people are really open. Yeah, we haven't actually faced like a ton of like aggressive opposition. However, there is like a lot of just people just don't care. It's just, oh yeah, whatever. Like, I'll do that later. Or, I think relativism, is still just so rampant. It's like, oh, that's great. That's your truth.
Yeah.
This is my truth. And if sometimes just people don't even want to really talk about that. It's just a kind of a lazy, like, yep. Yeah. You got your opinion. I got mine. Leave me alone, Mm-hmm. So yeah, sometimes I wish we had more of the people that are like, hey, I'm going to plant my feet in the ground and I'm going to push against you. I'm going to say, hey, you're absolutely wrong. And I'd rather have that discussion than the like whatever, you believe that, I believe this.
Oh, I agree, right? Because it's in the discussion and the dialogue that you can open minds.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And hearts, of course.
Yeah. The Lord, you just let the Lord come into that and just through friendship and charity, hopefully that's a powerful witness. And then, yeah, if you have that opportunity to like logically try to walk through a few things with people, that's great. But usually it takes a while. It's not one conversation, as I'm sure you know.
Anthony, if people who are listening who maybe have a kid in college, how do they find out more about Focus? How can they point people towards you? And also, before we get off, I want to hear about how you're funded and how we can help you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, if you want to learn more about Focus, I would just go to www.focus.org, FOCUS.org, and you can learn a lot about the campuses we serve. There's a tab that says Find a Campus, and you can just basically search by state for a campus that we serve at. If you are searching and you don't see that campus that maybe your child or grandchild's going to, there's another resource called the Digital Campus, which is like we have missionaries in Denver and across the country that will invest in students digitally and just reach out to them and mentor them from a distance.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's been so many opportunities to just try to innovate. And I think COVID too has just pushed the envelope on innovating, especially in that digital space. Very true. And I'd say too, like if you also see a campus, you don't see a campus on there, start praying that, we get to that campus, or, if you have a connection to the campus or a connection somewhere, like ask the question, hey, like I heard about this thing Focus, like why doesn't, this university have it? Like maybe knock on a door and ask the question. Yeah, that's how I'm here at Cincinnati. It's a whole other story. So, and
how can people donate to this great cause? Because I'm assuming this is kept alive on donations and people being generous all across the country.
100%. I mean, I would say I thrive on support. We not only survive, we want to thrive on the support. And that's really what that looks like for every missionary, as a team of dozens of individuals and families who are praying for that missionary and financially giving to support the whole budget of that missionary, the salary, and then all the stuff that they need to buy on campus, or everything. It's everything. So the way that you can support a missionary is you could also just go to, again, like focus.org. You could just say, find a missionary. And then if you know a missionary, or you could look up me, for instance, just Anthony Cirillo, Cirillo. And we have all of our support pages, and you can make like a special gift or like a monthly gift to fuel our mission. If you even have a campus near you, say, you have a child or grandchild that's going to campus, nearby, and you want to support that team, you can look up that campus. And there's even a way to give to a particular like team through our website, focus.org. So that's pray for us and then give and then spread the word, because so many people don't know that we're on 160 campuses. They don't know that we have over 800 missionaries serving on those campuses, that it's really in some areas of the country, Focus is one of the best kept secrets of the church. I'm a little biased, being an on-campus missionary, but
I'm 100% sure that you're doing tremendous work and exactly where you need to be, which is with the youth, the future of our country, the future of our faith. How wonderful that people like you are available for them. And I urge my listeners, go to focus.org and donate. Find Anthony Cirillo or one of his brother missionaries or sister missionaries. You have women too, right?
Yes, men and women. Yep. Each team is about 2 men and 2 women usually.
Oh, well, wonderful. So please go to focus.org and help these wonderful young people out. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
And now Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry. It's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday, when we'll eavesdrop and participate in perhaps the most pivotal dialogue in the Gospel, when Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am? And who do you say that I am?" In response to that first question, the poll of what other people were saying, the disciples were eager to respond. They informed Jesus that the people were numbering him among the greatest Jewish heroes of all time, like the prophets Elijah and Jeremiah, and more recently John the Baptist. But Jesus wasn't going to stop at that preliminary question. First, because it wasn't enough to rest on what the survey said, to rely on what others believed, despite the exalted circles into which people were placing Jesus. Second, because the assessments weren't true. Jesus was far greater than Elijah, Jeremiah, and John. He was greater than Abraham, Moses, David, and Solomon too. Third, because Jesus didn't want those with him merely to remain fans or admirers of him, numbering among the great celebrities of Jewish history, because that would not set them on the path in which he had come into the world to lead them. And so we asked the second question, "Who do you say that I am?" All but one of the disciples remained mute. It was easy to communicate what the survey said, but to put oneself on the line to make a personal public confession required courage and conviction. I've always been amazed that Nathanael, aka Bartholomew, didn't say anything. Since the first time he met Jesus, he cried out that Jesus was the Son of God and the King of Israel. But for some reason now he lacked the chutzpah to say it again. Likewise, many of the apostles by this point were trying to jockey to be the greatest in the Messianic administration they fully expected Jesus to inaugurate. But none had the courage to speak up. Simon Peter, however, put out into the deep. God the Father had led him to recognize that Jesus was indeed far greater than what the others were saying, and he had the guts to be the first to say it. "You are the Christ," he declared. Christ, the Greek word for Messiah, communicated that Jesus was the long-awaited one foretold by all the prophets. St. Matthew's version of the scene, he recalls Peter's also confessing Jesus to be more than the Messiah, the very own Son of God. To make such an admission was to bring into the foreground a whole series of expectations. The Messiah was expected to be the one who would bring back the kingdom of David, who would kick out all foreign powers and return Israel to international prominence. But lest they jumped to that confusion, Jesus, as soon as Peter had enunciated his true identity, began to teach them what type of Messiah he would be, how he would inaugurate his kingdom, and how they were to share in and announce it. And it blew their mind. Rather than uniting the Jews to defeat and expel the Romans, rather than leading the 12 tribes to triumph, he would instead suffer greatly, be rejected by the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, and be killed. Jesus told them all of this, St. Mark tells us, openly, so that they would know it clearly. To get a sense of their shock, it would be like someone who had just won a presidential election in his victory speech saying that rather than lead his opponents and country to greatness, he would instead be seized by the members of his party in collaboration with the opposition parties and various foreign powers, be humiliated, tortured, and finally hung from a national monument. That's how shocking what Jesus was saying was. But Peter, emboldened by his previous affirmation, and obviously desiring not only to be the principal advisor of the Messiah, but bodyguard, took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid anything like this should happen to you," he said, according to St. Matthew's eyewitness account. He couldn't fathom that a Messiah would be rejected and killed rather than conquer. It was totally incompatible with Jewish messianic expectations for the long-awaited one to suffer in this way. But Jesus wanted to help him and all the apostles recognize that yes, he was the Messiah, but his kingdom and liberation he was bringing were different from what they were expecting. He tells Peter not "get away from me," but "get behind me." Jesus wasn't ridding himself of Peter, but he was pointing out what Peter had been trying to do: lead the Lord rather than follow the Lord. To tell him to get behind him was to make him a disciple rather than a roadblock. He also told him the reason why he was behaving like an obstacle. "You're thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." Peter was seeing only with human eyes, from human political hopes. rather than with the eyes of faith, the eyes that God seeks to give. Peter at first saw what the crowds didn't, that Jesus wasn't just one of the prophets of old, but rather the Messiah. But Jesus was helping him see the type of Messiah he really was, rather than just Peter imagined would be, so that Peter and all the others would be able to confess Jesus in far greater depth. Jesus continued the consequential conversation by calling all the apostles together and saying that not only would he suffer, but if we sought to remain with him, we must suffer too. It's a challenging message we shouldn't water down. Whoever wishes to come after me, Jesus said, whoever wants to share in my kingdom and reign with me, must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. As if that is not challenging enough, Jesus adds, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it. To use the analogy given before, Jesus was saying that anyone who wanted to support him would have to say no to worldly ambitions, pick up his own noose, and follow him to the public hanging. Let's bring the conversation around. Jesus asks each of us, individually and constantly, what he asked his first followers. Who do you say that I am? It's not enough for us to rest on what others have said, on what the Catechism teaches, on what the doctors of the Church, the Pope, the bishops, our parents, grandparents, and godparents have said. All that's helpful, but it's not sufficient. We must all make a consequential admission to state clearly and personally who Jesus is and to conform our life to that truth. How would we answer that question if it were asked to us today? The great philosopher and apologist Peter Craved recently wrote, the question Jesus asked his apostles is the same question he asks us. Who do you say that I am? Am I just a holy messenger, just a prophet like John the Baptist or Elijah? Or am I your Mr. Fix-It, your Superman, your superhero? Or am I your obedient servant to all your foolish and fallen desires? Or am I Mr. Nice Guy, or super social worker, or Mr. Political Correctness? C.S. Lewis famously said that Jesus is either a lunatic, a liar, or Lord. A lunatic who crazily believed he was God incarnate. A liar who knew he wasn't but claimed to be. Or truly Son of God, divine, the Savior, the King of the universe, and worthy to be obeyed. Who do we say Jesus is? If we confess him to be who he really is, then that means, as Jesus himself describes in the gospel, getting behind him, thinking as he thinks, denying ourselves, picking up our own cross daily and following him. It's obvious that this is very demanding, because just as at Peter's time, these commands go against worldly ways. Rather than affirming ourselves, Jesus calls us to deny ourselves. Rather than fleeing from suffering, he tells us to seize our cross and die out of love for God and others. Rather than doing our own thing, he tells us to follow him. Rather than seeking to save our life by our own wits, he tells us that the only way to save it is to lose it in loving service of God and others, perhaps even to the point of death. We live in a self-affirming age, and Jesus calls us to self-denial so that we might have self-mastery and be capable of self-gift. We live in a hedonistic age that's addicted to pleasure and phobic about pain, and Jesus calls us to take up or seize, rather than just reluctantly accept, the cross, the instrument in which we will die to ourselves so that he in turn may live. Then he calls us to follow him as he gives his life for other salvation, as he washes other people's feet, and as he calls us to love others as he has loved us first. He asks, who do you say that I am? And then reminds us, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. As a stranger and you gave me welcome. Naked and you gave me clothing. Ill and you gave me comfort. In prison and you visited me. To confess Jesus is therefore something we do not just with our lips but with our life, as we choose to have among ourselves the same attitude Jesus did, who, as St. Paul reminds us, though he was in the form of God, emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, and humbling himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. The fathers of the Second Vatican Council stressed this when they said, Christ fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear, and indicated that we are to follow him on that path of cruciform, self-giving love. Man cannot find himself, they wrote, except in the unselfish gift of himself to others. We must lose ourselves to gain life. We must die to ourselves and allow God to raise us from the dead. We must unselfishly sacrifice ourselves for others. This is Christianity. This is the gospel. We have a chance to respond to that question, who do you say that I am, at every Mass, in response to Jesus' real presence. From the altar, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world asks us, who do you say that I am? We have the privilege to proclaim our faith in him, echoing the words of the centurion with wonder that despite our unworthiness, the Messiah and the Son of God desires to come under our roof. As we prepare to make our confession on Sunday in communion with the whole Church, let us ask Jesus for the grace to model our life in the mystery of his passion, death, and resurrection, and give witness to him by the faithful, courageous way we, together with him, lose our life to give it out of love for him and others. God bless you.
To check out more from Father Roger Landry, make sure to read all of his writings at the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. We hope to have you back next week. And until then, you go with our prayers.